Today, I want to talk two books that are peak summer meets fall vibes. They're warm and coastal on the outside, but dark, moody, and unsettling underneath. So if you're finding yourself missing summer, but heavily leaning into some darker, spookier, moodier energy, then these two books are the reads for you. So we have Summer Rental by Rektok Ross, who is another litigator turned author like myself. And we also have Nothing Bad Happens Here by Ekstrom. Now, both of these stories are mystery/thrillers. They're both very atmospheric, and they'll both have you guessing who the killer is. However, I would say each story is more suited for a particular type of reader. If you want something that's more fast-paced, plot-heavy, and borderline slasher adjacent, think Scream in a summer house in the middle of a hurricane, then Summer Rental is the book for you. This book will give you a tight and engaging plot, the classic who's the killer tension, and for the most part, pretty strong pacing. On the other hand, if you want a slightly slower, more atmospheric, and more relationship-driven story, then Nothing Bad Happens Here might be your vibe. It's ethereal, emotional, more introspective. It's still a mystery, and it still has the guess the killer vibe, or guess kind of the underlying creepy situation that might be happening in the background of this picture-perfect town vibe, which my book Prey heavily relates to. But the pacing is intentionally a little slower. My personal thoughts on these two books is that I was probably a little bit more gripped and engaged in Summer Rental. They both suffered a tiny bit from sagging middle syndrome, which is very common, and if you are an author, you know it can be kind of that's one of your biggest hurdles a lot of times when crafting a book. But still, they're both good. I would solidly recommend reading both of them. I gravitated more to Summer Rental. I like faster paced stories. Being someone who's prone to anxiety, I tend to not require all that much introspection from my characters. I love a great character arc, but I don't need to be stuck in their head too terribly much dealing with their demons. I read to escape. I read to escape my anxiety and escape my demons. I don't need to go down the thought pattern spiral and loop that the character is in, because I already have my own going on constantly in my head. So this is just my preference as an author and as a reader. I tend to prefer more plot-heavy, plot-centric books. But if you do like more character-driven and more introspective books, then I would recommend Nothing Bad Happens Here. But for me, I like the fast-paced books. I like heavy plot. So Summer Rental edged out Nothing Bad Happens Here, just for me personally. So which one should you read? If you want adrenaline, tension, and forward momentum, read Summer Rental. On the other hand, if you prefer dreamy dread, emotional depth, and more character focus, I would go with Nothing Bad Happens Here. Also, as far as setting goes, Nothing Bad Happens Here takes place in Nantucket. It's a little bit more upscale. You get more of a view into how that other side lives, which is something that I experienced having gone to Princeton. So I did appreciate the elements that the author wove in. I thought that they were very accurate to what that kind of experience is like and what vacationing there would be like. Versus Summer Rental is a little bit more spring break in Florida. I think they're in an island off of Florida vibes. So it's just like a little bit more fun, laid back, party centric, whereas this also has parties, but it's a little bit more chic, posh, upper class. So that was a fun element that was in this book. Both stories had a supernatural element woven into the more typical mystery thriller narrative, which I really enjoyed. My books do that as well. They bridge the gap between several genres, but they, while having heavy mystery and thriller elements, also have a supernatural undertone. So both of these books did that very well. One is more of a cryptid sea creature type undertone, and the other one has more to do with ghosts and hauntings and urban legends. My main criticism for both books, and this is a light criticism because I'm still recommending that you read these books, is that I felt that they both suffered a bit from sagging middle syndrome, which is something that if you are an author or an aspiring author, you will be familiar with, probably also if you read a lot as well. But sagging middle syndrome happens a lot, and it's more prone to happen in the books that are a little bit more slower paced and introspective. So I did notice it more in Nothing Bad Happens Here than I did in Summer Rental, although it was there a tiny bit as well. However, if you are an aspiring author, sometimes it really helps to read books that work and the story is great and effective, but you have some structural issues that could have been improved upon. So if you are an aspiring mystery/thriller author, especially if you want to work in some urban fantasy or supernatural elements into your story as well, I would challenge you to read these two books and just consider yourself, what would you have done differently, storytelling wise, if anything, to make the middle a little bit more catchy and a little bit more engaging. What you really want is your reader to be so engaged with the story that they're not sitting back in the middle going, okay, well, so where is this going? Or like really trying to guess too much of like where the story in general is headed. Obviously you want them to be guessing who the killer is, but you want a book that's so zippy and so engaging that the reader is so drawn into it that like they're not even aware, are we in the middle of the book, are we in the end of the book? If anything, they're only checking the length because they don't want it to end, so they want to see, oh my gosh, how close am I to the climax? Make sure you ask yourself which structure resonates the most with you. Are you more drawn to those slower, more emotionally in-depth character arcs that might be a little bit more introspective? Or are you really drawn to fast-paced, plot-heavy, very grabby type narratives? Now, ideally, the diamond in the rough type stories are the ones that have a perfect balance of both of those elements, because you want your reader to stay engaged the whole time, which having a very, plot-driven story can do, but also you need the audience to care about your main character and the fact that they're going through whatever they're going through. And for the audience to care, they do need to know a bit about your character, the struggles that they have, their limiting beliefs, and what journey they are going through. Also, how much horror elements and or speculative elements do you want to infuse? Mysteries and thrillers are two genres, very related adjacent genres at that tend to delve into horror often. They delve into supernatural, the paranormal, and often some urban fantasy elements as well. So if you're the type of reader where you prefer kind of just straight up in our world thrillers and mysteries, then you don't have to worry about this as much. But if you like some ghosts or some cryptids or some fantastical elements potentially, or even, characters who aren't sure what's going on. Are we completely in the world that we know? Or is there a chance or a hint that something more might be going on here? Then you're going to want to examine how much of these potentially fantastical or supernatural elements to include. Also, how much of a stomach do you have as an author and as a reader for horror elements? Now, horror can be scary, it can be stomach turning, but it can also send those chills down your spine that keep that reader incredibly engaged. So definitely ask yourself, how much horror am I infusing? Like, for example, Summer Rental definitely had more horror elements. It had more of that slasher kind of Scream type vibe, whereas Nothing Bad Happens Here was more of your typical thriller. It did have some creepy moments, but I would say the horror elements were definitely more heavy in Summer Rental. So that's something that if you are an aspiring author and you read both of these books, you can think about, and you can make that determination for yourself. How much horror do I want to include in this book? Most importantly, ask yourself how you would rework the middle of each so that the readers never stop and think, where is this going? You want them to wonder who the killer is, but you don't want them to be stepping away from the story because the story starts to meander and they're wondering, okay, wait, where is this going? You want them to be so gripped and hooked that they don't even have a moment to step back from the story and wonder what's going on because they're already turning the page and going forward. Remember, you want your readers to feel dragged forward by the story's current, unable to escape. Your characters, on the other hand, need autonomy. They should be the ones pushing the story forward and pushing the plot forward, not just reacting to what plot elements happen to them or what the other characters are doing. This is really pivotal, especially if you're writing mysteries and thrillers, because sometimes you can lean too much into the action or you can lean too much into the diabolical movements or machinations of the other characters, and your main character is just stuck in a reactive cycle. The danger of having a overly reactive main character. Not reactive in terms of they're very emotional, but I mean their primary existence in the plot is to in the story is to react to things that happen in the plot and to what other characters are doing. And in that case, your reader is going to go, wait, why am I hearing the story from this very passive main character? Why am I not hearing the story from those who are actually driving the plot forward? So you never want to fall into that trap. Which of these two books are you picking up first? And stay tuned, because for my next review, we are diving into 3 young adult and or new adult school friend themed thrillers that also blend in horror and or supernatural elements. Now, 2 of the 3 books are incredibly propulsive and are perfect examples of how to keep your story gripping while also having characters that have plenty of emotional depth.